What if a song so long DJs used it for bathroom breaks climbed to number 4 on the charts? A white rock band that shocked audiences when they took the stage. They became Motown itself, the label, the brand, the impossible gamble. Millions of records sold. Then the betrayal, a jury trial that cast out the voice behind the hits. Sampled by hip-hop legends but forgotten by rock history. This is the rise and fall of Rare Earth. Detroit, 1960. The automotive capital of America was pulsing with two kinds of machinery. The assembly lines building Fords and Chevrolets, and the rhythm section pumping out of Berry Gordy's Hitsville, USA studios. The Motown sound was being born in real time, defining black excellence in American music. And in the middle of this cultural explosion, saxophonist Gil Bridges and drummer Peter Rivera were playing in an R&B band called the Sunliners. The name came from Bridges' 1956 Ford Sunliner convertible. When someone suggested he join a band called the Glowworms, Bridges refused outright. "Let's call it after my car instead," he said. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. They played the Detroit club circuit relentlessly, every dive bar that would have them, even stretching out into college bars in Ann Arbor as their reputation grew. By 1966, the lineup had solidified. Bridges, Rivera, bass player John Persh, guitarist Rod Richards, and keyboardist Kenny James. 5 white kids playing black music in a city segregating along increasingly hard lines. But local fame meant nothing beyond Detroit. They signed with small labels releasing singles that went nowhere. In 1968, they released Dream Answers. It included an early recording of Get Ready. The album failed to chart. The dream was stalling. The musical landscape was shifting toward the psychedelic, the heavy, the progressive. The Sunliners sounded like a doo-wop group from the 1950s, so they changed their name to something more with it. They became Rare Earth. When Motown called, Barney Ailes saw something nobody else could understand. A self-contained white rock band that could bridge the racial divide. Woodstock had just happened. FM radio was exploding. The kids wanted long jams, heavy guitars, and something dangerous. The deal was struck in 1969. Motown didn't have a name for their new rock division. The band jokingly suggested Rare Earth. To their shock, Motown agreed. Suddenly, Rare Earth wasn't just signed to Motown, they were the label. A white rock band on Motown? It was audacious. It sounded like a disaster waiting to happen, but it was about to change everything. The year was 1970. Rare Earth was recording their first album for Motown. With side 2 still open, someone suggested Get Ready, the Smokey Robinson song they'd been stretching out in their live shows. In the clubs, the song had evolved into a 21-minute jam session designed to give every member a solo. It was their showcase piece, the moment where drummer Peter Rivera could unleash a drum break that made the entire room vibrate, where Gil Bridges' sax could soar over the rhythm section. They cut a more conventional version first, then scrapped it. The band set up their own recording equipment and laid down a 21-minute take that mirrored the way they played it on stage, later sweetening it with overdubs and dubbed in audience applause to give it a raw, live feel. The track occupied the entire second side of the album. Motown executives were leery. The industry standard for a single was roughly 3 minutes. A 21-minute song wasn't a single, it was commercial suicide. But the band knew something Motown didn't. FM radio was changing. Underground DJs were playing entire album sides. On progressive FM stations, the full 21-minute version started getting late-night spins. DJs could queue up Get Ready, walk away for coffee, and come back to a crowd that had been grooving for 21 minutes straight. Word spread. Still, AM radio wouldn't touch the full-length beast. So Motown released an edited version, cutting the jam down to 2 minutes and 46 seconds. The edited version exploded. By spring 1970, Get Ready had climbed to number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100. It far outperformed The Temptations' original 1966 version, which had only reached number 29. But here was where the story got even more interesting. Band members recalled that the record first caught fire on black-oriented stations in cities like Washington, D.C. hearing the groove and the soulful vocals, often assumed the band was black. When Rare Earth finally took the stage, the reaction was shock. "You're white?" Gil Bridges recalled people asking, stunned. This racial ambiguity became core to their legend. They were a white band that sounded black, a rock band that grooved like Motown, a Motown act that played like Led Zeppelin. They existed in a space that shouldn't have existed, and that was exactly why it worked. A 21-minute jam that became a hit, a white band that conquered both rock and R&B audiences, an impossible dream made real through pure audacity. The album went gold. Rare Earth was no longer a novelty. They were contenders. Success bred momentum. By late 1970, Rare Earth released Ecology and delivered another massive hit. I Know I'm Losing You climbed to number 7. The formula was working. Take Motown classics, infuse them with hard rock energy, extend them into hypnotic jams. But the band wasn't content to just be a cover act. In 1971, that original anthem arrived. I just want to celebrate another day. I Just Want to Celebrate was written by Motown staff writers Dino Fikaris and Nick Zesses. The band heard the writers playing it in a studio hallway. They asked if they could record it. They knocked out the entire track in a single day. The song's message was pure, unfiltered joy. I just want to celebrate another day of living. In 1971, with Vietnam still raging, with Nixon in the White House, this message resonated deeply. It wasn't protest music. It was just a song about being alive, about finding joy in existence. The track peaked at number 7 and became their most enduring legacy. Decades later, it was still a staple of classic rock radio, still featured in commercials and movies, still erupting from speakers at sporting events. But the real proof of Rare Earth's dominance wasn't just the chart positions. It was the stages they commanded. They shared massive festival bills with some of the era's biggest names. They toured with Grand Funk Railroad. They played Madison Square Garden. They weren't just surviving in the arena rock world, they were thriving. Gil Bridges was a licensed pilot who often flew the band to their gigs himself. Picture that, a saxophonist navigating a small plane through the American heartland, landing in whatever city had a gig that night, then taking the stage to shake arenas. In 1971, they released Rare Earth in Concert, a double live album featuring extended versions of Get Ready and I Know I'm Losing You that stretched out into epic crowd-pleasing workouts. The album was housed in a gatefold cover that felt as oversized as the music inside. These extended jams represent a time when musicianship was paramount. Sweaty arenas, extended soloing, real musicianship. This was the peak. In 1972, they released Hey Big Brother, which climbed to number 19. It was their last major chart hit, but at the time, it felt like the momentum would never stop. They were selling out shows. Radio loved them. Audiences worshipped them. And then, slowly, the ground beneath them began to shift. The first crack appeared in 1972, when Motown announced it was moving from Detroit to Los Angeles. Berry Gordy wanted to pivot into film and television, evidenced by Lady Sings the Blues, starring Diana Ross. For a band so deeply rooted in the Detroit club scene, the relocation was devastating. Rare Earth was a product of Detroit. The grit, the industrial energy, the Motown session musicians they'd worked with for years. All of it was part of their DNA. Internal instability compounded the external pressure. Founding members Rod Richards and Kenny James departed in the early 70s, and John Persh was gone soon after. While the new lineup was technically proficient, the original chemistry began to fray. But the bigger problem was the music industry itself. By the mid-70s, the landscape that had allowed Rare Earth to flourish was disappearing. The heavy soul rock sound they pioneered was being squeezed by harder, flashier arena rock on one side and disco on the other. Bands like Kiss and Led Zeppelin dominated with a more aggressive approach. Meanwhile, the Bee Gees and Donna Summer were conquering the pop charts. Rare Earth found itself in a genre with no definition, too rock for the R&B charts, too soulful for the rock market. Motown, now preoccupied with Diana Ross and Stevie Wonder, lost interest in its flagship rock band. In 1972, the band lobbied to write more of their own material. They released Willie Remembers, composed almost entirely of group-written songs. Band members later said Motown didn't believe the material would sell and gave it little promotion. In a final attempt to recapture their early magic, Motown paired them with legendary producer Norman Whitfield for the 1973 album Ma. The album was ambitious, experimental, featuring a 17-minute title track that would later be considered a masterpiece of psychedelic soul. But in 1973, it was a commercial failure. The audience that had made Rare Earth stars didn't connect with the new direction. Radio ignored it, and Motown began to lose faith entirely. The decline of Rare Earth mirrored the broader commercialization of rock in the mid-70s. And Rare Earth, the band that had once bridged every divide, no longer fit anywhere. The identity crisis was complete, and the fall was coming. The collapse didn't happen suddenly. There was no plane crash, no overdose, no dramatic implosion. Instead, Rare Earth's fall was a slow, painful dissolution, the kind of quiet tragedy that mirrored aging itself. Behind the scenes, something darker was happening. Peter Rivera later claimed that Motown management had employed divide-and-conquer tactics to split the band apart. The democracy that had once governed the band's decisions turned into a political battleground of lobbying and manipulation. The drug use escalated. The arguments intensified. The music suffered. What had once been a brotherhood forged in Detroit clubs became a business arrangement poisoned by mistrust. By 1974, the final break was at hand. The group split into two factions, and a protracted legal battle ensued for the rights to the Rare Earth name. A court ultimately awarded the name to Gil Bridges' side. Peter Rivera, the voice behind the multi-platinum hits, was effectively cast out of his own group. Rivera formed a short-lived project, but the magic was gone. The audience didn't care about new lineups. They wanted the original, and the original was dead. For the fans who had filled arenas in 1971, who had discovered Get Ready on late-night FM radio, this was the heartbreak. Not a rock and roll death, but the slow dissolution of something sacred under the weight of industry machinery. But here was the cruel irony. In April 1974, just months before the split fully hardened, Rare Earth performed at California Jam. They opened the festival, playing alongside Black Sabbath, the Eagles, and Deep Purple, to a crowd of over 200,000 people. They performed I Just Want to Celebrate for the largest audience of their lives. The crowd sang along. The cameras captured it all. It was a triumph, proof that they still mattered. And backstage, the band was already coming apart at the seams. They were performing Unity for the cameras while privately planning their divorce. It was the ultimate rock and roll tragedy, success that arrived too late to save what was already broken. After the split, Gil Bridges kept the name alive. He became the sole constant, touring relentlessly, rebuilding lineups, chasing the diminishing returns of nostalgia circuit gigs. The quiet fade was complete, from headlines to afterthoughts, from arenas to cruises, and sometimes there was no explosion to mark the end, just silent. In the decades following the mid-70s split, Rare Earth continued in various forms, led with dogged persistence by Gil Bridges. In 1978, the band made a modest return to the US charts with Warm Ride, a song written by the Bee Gees. It was a moment of validation, but it was fleeting. Around the turn of the 80s, Peter Rivera briefly came back into the fold, cutting new material with the band for a short spell. For a moment, reconciliation seemed possible, but the wounds were too deep. The reunion was short-lived. The band's story during the 1980s and 90s was one of endurance. They played smaller venues, casinos, county fairs, and corporate events. There was dignity in this persistence. They were still playing the songs that had defined a generation. I'm losing you. Gil Bridges continued to tour until the pandemic hit in 2020. He had been on the road for nearly 7 decades, from the Sunliners in Detroit clubs to Rare Earth on the nostalgia circuit. On December 8th, 2021, Gil Bridges passed away. He was 79 years old. His death marked the final end of an era that had lasted nearly 7 decades. The persistence of Rare Earth mirrored the aging process itself. The world changed. Fame faded. Bodies broke down. But the fire never fully died. Gil Bridges proved that. He kept playing until his body gave out, kept honoring the legacy, kept the dream alive even when history had moved on. There was something profoundly human in this aftermath. Not redemption, exactly. Just the reality of men who created something beautiful together, watched it fall apart, then spent the rest of their lives trying to make sense of what had happened. That's rock and roll. That was life. And sometimes, it was enough. Today, Rare Earth exists in a strange cultural space. They're simultaneously forgotten giants and one of the most sampled bands in hip-hop history. Their 21-minute version of Get Ready became a prized source of drum breaks for early hip-hop DJs and a favorite for serious dancers in the Bronx. The drum break became a legendary breakbeat that pioneers worked into their sets. Beck sampled them. NWA sampled them. Scarface and Black Sheep, all of them, and many others, built tracks on Rare Earth's rhythms. The band that had been forgotten by rock radio found new life in the headphones of a generation that never heard the original. Meanwhile, I Just Want to Celebrate enjoyed a massive afterlife in television and advertising. It appeared in campaigns for Ford, AT&T, and Nicoderm. It was featured in major films like The Expendables 2, A Knight's Tale, and Bullet Train. Yet despite this omnipresence, the band itself is often left out of the conversation about the greatest rock acts of the 70s. They remain a notable snub from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, despite having sold millions of records and having multiple top 10 hits. The answer is complicated. Part of it is genre confusion. They were too rock for R&B history, too soulful for rock history. Part of it is the lack of a tragic rock and roll death to cement their mythology. Part of it is simply the cruel randomness of how cultural memory gets constructed. But for the listener who remembered hearing Get Ready for the first time on late-night FM radio, for the fan who had stood in the sweaty crowds of the early 70s, the legacy was secure. Rare Earth proved that a white band could possess the heart and soul of Motown while delivering the heavy riffs required for the arena age. They were pioneers. They broke down racial barriers. They took impossible risks, a 21-minute single, a rock band on Motown, and turned them into triumphs. They sold millions, filled arenas, created music that still moves people 50 years later. The fact that history moved on didn't diminish what they achieved. It just made their story more poignant. They were giants, even if the world forgot to build them monuments. Rare Earth proved that the impossible could become real. A 21-minute jam, a white rock band on Motown. Millions of records sold, but success couldn't protect them from the quiet tragedy that came when the world changed faster than they could adapt. The music endured. The samples kept their rhythms alive. The songs still trigger memories of summer nights and sweaty arenas. What's your memory of hearing Rare Earth for the first time? Drop it in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more forgotten giants of rock history.